In this video, we're going to be using the strategy of rounding numbers, including the tenths and the hundredths, on a vertical number line. For this video, I went ahead and set up my paper in advance. You can pause the video as we're moving through to set up each portion as we go. So, we're rounding numbers on vertical number lines. We're going to be including tenths, hundredths. We're also going to be doing ones. Sometimes the number's already rounded. So I don't want that to confuse you, that it's not always changing. So we're going to start with an example. We're going to do two examples of this. The first example we're going to start with is 6 2/10. So it wants us to round it to the nearest hundredth. Well, we need to write 6 2/10 in hundredths. And that is 6 20 hundredths. So in hundredths, this is what we have started with. When we round, we always put the 1 below and the 1 above on the number line. So if we were doing that, we would be putting, well, there's 6 10 hundredths. We have 6 20 hundredths. We have 6 30 hundredths. Well, what you probably notice as I'm numbering this number line, 6 20 hundredths is already there. So I'm going to circle it because it is exactly that. So 6 20 hundredths rounded to the nearest hundredth is still 6 2/10. So that's an example of where the value didn't change. It was already rounded to the nearest hundredth. Let's look at this as tenths on the number line. So let's go ahead and number our number line. The next tenth would be 6 3/10, 6 2/10, 6 1/10. Well, what we notice is 6 2/10 is again already on my number line. That means 6 2/10 rounded to the nearest tenth is already done. It's 6 2/10. Please do not let these problems confuse you. Now, the ones we have a little bit different story. So remember, we always go 1 down, 1 up. So if I go below 6 2/10, that would be 6. The next number on my number line would be 6 7/10. I'm sorry, 6. What am I saying? I am so sorry. 6 ones would go up to 7 ones. So if I'm counting on my number line, this is more than 6, but it's less than 7. So it's going to fall somewhere between 6 and 7. And we're trying to figure out, is it closer to the 6 or is it closer to the 7? So we find our midpoint. Our midpoint is 6 5/10. Because your 5 is always the middle of 0 to 10. So 5 is going to be our midpoint. Well, 6 2/10, 2 is going to be more than this 0 and less than the 5. So if I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, it's going to round down to the 6. So 6 2/10 rounds to the nearest one is 6. All right, let's look at a second example. I know I went a little fast on that one, even made a mistake myself. So I'll slow down a little bit on this next example. So this next example, we're going to take 35 375 thousandths. We're going to first round it to the nearest hundredth. So, when I look at this number, I'm going to say, okay, if I went up to the next hundredth, here's my hundredths, which is 7, the 35 wouldn't change. So I'm going to the next value for my hundredths. So here's 35. I I have my 3/10. If I went up to the next hundredth, it would be 8/100. So 35 and 38/100. If I went down, it means I would no longer have the 5. Another way to think about this is if this was 0, 380 is more than 375. So when I'm thinking about, well, what's the one before? Again, the 35 doesn't change. That's my whole number. The 3 is in the 10th place, and I'm trying to round to the hundredths. So if this became a 0, then that would be 7. If we look at this and we put that imaginary 0, 35 and 375 thousandths will fall between the 35 and 370 and 380 thousandths. So we find our midpoint. Our midpoint is 35, and the 3 doesn't change, but halfway between the 370 and 380 would be 375. 75 is halfway between 70 and 80. Just kind of ways to help you think about these large numbers. Now, it's asked me to round to the nearest hundredth. So 5 is actually the midpoint. If it's at the midpoint or beyond, it is going to round up. Once you have passed the middle, it's the point of no return, meaning you just keep on going. So 35 and 375 thousandths rounds to 35 and 38 hundredths. It is not needed to put this 0 in. It does not change the value of the number. Now let's take the same number and we're going to round it to the nearest 10th. So if I write this number down here, 35 and 375 thousandths. Let's underline the 10th place because I'm actually rounding to the 10th place. So this might kind of help your focus. That means if I go one more, it would be 35 and 4 because 4 is one more than 3. If I round down, it's going to be 35 and, well, if I round it down, these two would turn to zeros, so and 3 tenths. So this number will fall between 35 and 3 tenths and 35 and 4 tenths. We're trying to figure out which one is it closer to. So let's go ahead and put in our midpoint right here. The 35 and, remember, we're trying to go halfway between 30 and 40. Those are my imaginary zeros. Halfway between 30 and 40 is 35. So now I go ahead and find where would I put this number on my number line. Well, the 35 doesn't give me a hint. It's going to fall anywhere. The 3 doesn't give me a hint, but the 7, when I look at this number right here, it is going to tell me where this whole number falls. So 7 is more than 5. So 37 is more than 35 and less than 40. So that means the 35 and 375 thousandths falls right there. Now remember, which one is it closest to? Well, it's closest to 35 and 4 tenths. So that tells me this number is going to round up to 35 and 4 tenths. Let's take a look at this rounded to the nearest ones. So rounded to the nearest ones. Well, let's write the number down here and kind of mark it up so I can show what I'm thinking. Here's 35 and 375 thousandths. This is my number. And if I mark this number up, I'm looking at my ones place. So let's go ahead and underline the place I'm trying to round it to. I'm trying to round it to 35. So I I know it's more than 35 right now, so I'm either going to round to 35 or I'll go up to 36. So I don't know yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 36 and 35 because this number falls somewhere between the two. So I need to find my midpoint. My midpoint is going to be past 35, but not to 36. So 35 and 5/10 is the midpoint on my number line. So now that I have this labeled, I'm ready to figure out where this number falls. So I look at the 10th place. I look at the place next door. And I say, okay, well, it's more than 35. And I'm looking at the 3/10. Well, the halfway tenth was 5/10. This is 3/10. So that tells me where to put it on my number line. 35 and 375 thousandths. I can see that it is closer to the 35 than it is the 36. So I'm going to round down to 35. So round it to the nearest ones place. 35 and 375 thousandths rounds down to 35. I hope these examples have helped you. You're welcome to watch the video again in order to get a better understanding.